And yep, we're being recorded. Great. So, which is good because this is going to be important stuff. So I just wanted to wish, I'm going to keep this very short because we have a lot of information and it's important stuff going out. My name is Tom Kerpus. I'm the executive director of the Manufacturing Institute here at Georgia Tech. And we were talking with our colleagues over at the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, also known as GA for Georgia, GA MEP, and really talking about this whole cybersecurity issue. And I think everybody knows, don't pick up the stick on the memory stick that's out in the parking lot that says, hey, pictures with a big smiley face on it and stick it into your computer because that's how you're going to get an infection and so forth. And people are aware of, I think, some of the simpler things. But what people are not completely aware of is just sort of the next level up. What are some of the things that you should be aware of? How might you mitigate these things, sort of keep yourself from getting in trouble and so forth? And then if something happens, what should you be doing? And so we got together with some of the different teams from around the country. And as mentioned, Georgia MEP, and you can see, Michael Barker over there, he's going to be our primary speaker today, but also Kyle Saleeby from Oak Ridge National Laboratory. He's part of the Department of Energy Cybersecurity Manufacturing Innovation Institute. And there's really some very good stuff going on here. But the purpose of today's talk, and again, it's being recorded, and Megan, I don't know if you'll be able to tell us how to access, if we could do the recording or if we need to do this again. But take a look at this. Let us know. I know this is going to be useful. This is just sort of a half a notch up from the don't plug your phone into the machine because or don't click on a bad link. I know Michael's going to also say that as well, but it's going to be a half a notch up above that. And that's really where we're targeting. We're looking at you as high-tech individuals and a little bit more than, a little bit more sophisticated than what we might see, in terms of somebody who just doesn't understand anything about good cybersecurity. So I think with that, again, this is going to be a series of talks. So today is the first one, and it's going to go between Michael and Kyle. And so we're going to give you some good practices. We're also going to give you some very interesting demos to see what can happen and what you could do and just how to do things. So a little bit on the hands-on perspective. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who's got a lot of experience in the area, and he's from the Georgia MEP, which, by the way, Georgia MEP is hosted by Georgia Tech. So again, it's, come down, see us over here at Georgia Tech Technology Square and so forth. But Georgia MEP is all about, and I suspect everybody on here knows this, but I'll say it anyway, is reaching out to the small, medium-sized enterprises here in Georgia. This is the Department of Commerce operation to make sure that the latest and greatest capabilities are out there and that they're at your disposal. So Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm ready to do some learning.
All right, thanks, Tom. And as Tom said, we kind of expect that people will know not to pick up that USB stick and put it in their computer. But you would think that here in 2022 that most people would know that. But sadly, I think as we go in the presentation, you'll kind of be shocked at some of the things that are going on. So anyway, let me go over here, and there we go. So today's agenda, basically. All right. So like I said, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of statistics as far as, what kind of malware is out there, how many people have been infected, what the cost is, which I will tell you is, like they say, if a breach is about $4 million. But that's probably the only statistic I'm going to tell you about. We're going to talk about the risk. We're going to talk a few statistics. We're going to talk specifically about CMMC because I think a lot of you might be manufacturers. Kind of a new cybersecurity 101, the practices that Tom was talking about, and some tools and resources that are available for you. And where is my cursor? Oh, there we go. All right, so just a little bit of definitions. For in the cybersecurity world, we work off of something called CIA, confidentiality, making sure that the information is kept confidential, that those who need it can get to it, and those who don't need to get to it or see it or use it do not have access to it. So that information is kept confidential. Integrity means that it's not been altered in any form. So the information you're looking at is the accurate information that you should be working with. And availability simply means that when you need it, it is there. And that can be as simple as if the internet goes down and it's in the cloud and you can't access it, that's availability. Or if your network goes down or it has been stolen or deleted, for example. And then, of course, now we're collecting a lot of personally identifiable information of people. And so now in the last few years, there's been a big push on privacy. If you collect other people's information or even your employees' information, how do you keep that data private? So that's kind of the concept of cybersecurity in a big overarching fashion. But even before I got into academia and I was out still visiting my clients, I would walk in all the way up to 2017. And if this was their good practices, right? If they had antivirus on their machines and it was up to date, they were paying for it, keeping it accurate, they got kudos, right? If they had some sort of complicated password using passphrases, 7 digits at least, 8 digits, yada, yada, they were in good shape as far as what we would consider basic cyber hygiene. If they were doing backups, right? If they were practicing not clicking on email links, etc. And they got really big kudos if they had a firewall with all their network behind it so that protected them against the internet. And you would think, okay, well, that seems pretty basic. Well, sadly, in 2015, most of the small to medium-sized companies that I was dealing with, that really was all they had to protect their network. And the philosophy back then, what I used to say over the years with my clients and talking to them why they needed cybersecurity, the motto was, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when you're going to be attacked or hacked. But since then, now I'm going out and I'm meeting with different companies. And one of the questions I'm asking them is, have you been hacked, attacked, breached, ransomware, phished, etc.? And I guess the good news and the bad news is that now everyone has been hacked. So it's not a matter of if, it's not a matter of when. Everybody I'm talking to is saying, yes, we've already had 1, 2, or 3 of these events. So now I'm adapting a little bit different philosophy. And the philosophy I'm telling people is, in the end, it's not going to matter if you have that few scars, but it will matter if you didn't live. And what do I mean by that? Because back in the 2015, 2016, 17, it was 80% of companies, small companies, that if they had a major breach like ransomware, they were not going to open up. Now, I guess the good news is that in 2019, it's down to 60% of small companies closed within 6 months of being hacked. And we'll talk about why that is in a little while. So a new philosophy is, life is not a matter of holding good cards, but of playing a poor hand well. Because unfortunately, most of us have a poor hand when it comes to cybersecurity. Why is that? Well, it's because we have to be right 100% of the time. The aggressor only has to be right once. And there's some rather big countries out there that are doing state-sponsored hacking, and they are working millions of attacks. And like I said, all they've got to do is get it right one time, and we have to be right 100%. So we've got all of this going on against us. And so let's just talk about what's called critical infrastructure. Well, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has defined 16 different critical infrastructures in the United States. And out of that is, one of those is manufacturing. By critical infrastructure, it means that the loss of one of these type of infrastructures would have a very heavy negative impact on our lives, on our livelihood, and on the way we live. So manufacturing is listed as part of that. When we look at manufacturing nationally, manufacturers contribute about $2.8 trillion annually to the economy, and that's first quarter 2022 data. But the kicker with this is that the majority of manufacturing firms, as I've said, are quite small. We are talking about mom and pop, generations of families that have created these companies years ago, and they're being run by sons, granddaughters, etc. And when we look at this, small to medium-sized companies, we see that manufacturing is the 6th largest employer in the U.S. So we've got all these manufacturing companies employing all these people, and they're small entities. If we look in Georgia, manufacturing accounts for roughly 10% of the total output of the state and roughly employs almost 10% of the workforce. And when we talk about defense industrial spending, Georgia is, in this particular slide, it says number 10. This came out of the Georgia Department of Economic Development. I've seen as high as we are 8 on the list of the amount of money that the DoD spends in defense contracts in the state of Georgia. And you can see we're from Georgia Tech and we're number 2 there on that list. So we have, a real need to be very compliant with the rules and regulations of the DoD when it comes to handling their information. And so when we look overall, the state has about 6,600 manufacturers, and out of that, about 1,200 of those manufacturers support the defense industrial base. Another good news, bad news sort of thing. The good news is for the 8th year in a row, Georgia is listed as the top state for doing business. What that means is that we are constantly attracting new businesses to the state. But while we're attracting all these new businesses to the state, people are resigning in great numbers, particularly in manufacturing. Manufacturing is one of the top industries where people are leaving, and we've got 2 different things going on there. One is the Great Resignation, because people are moving on to other jobs. With COVID, people are reevaluating their lives. They're saying, "Wow, I want to move someplace else. I want to get a different kind of job." And the other is those of us who have gray hair or no hair. There's 10,000 people a day retiring. So there's this great brain drain, if you will, of people leaving the industry, and particularly in manufacturing. But the kicker is that manufacturing is growing. And you can see that over just the last few years, we've gone from about 100,000 job openings in manufacturing to well over 1 million job openings in manufacturing. And nowhere do we see this better than in Georgia. Georgia added over 15,000 manufacturing jobs. This was reported in February 2022 for 2021. So 15,000 new manufacturing jobs. If we look at some of the latest news releases, August 4th, 100 new jobs in Columbus announced, 100 new jobs in Macon. This was just on the 17th of August. And then we've got record unemployment, the lowest that it has been in, quite a number of years. So we are having this problem with we're growing. We've got all this manufacturing growth in the state, and companies don't have the employees that they need. So how are they fixing this problem? What are they substituting for the employees? And so what we've got is we're in this new era, what's called manufacturing or industry 4.0, where we're using what's called a cyber physical system, Internet of Things devices to go out and do things that people might do, gather information that people might have gathered, but just in general, implementing these to create what's called smart manufacturing facilities. And what that's doing is it's expanding the attack footprint of industry. Using Internet of Things devices, cloud computing, integrating information technology with operational technology. You've got SCADA, PLCs, CICS, all that going on out in your manufacturing plant. And I always say I'm not trying to, insult any machine, but basically most of those IT devices are dumb devices, right? They know what they need to do. They do one thing, they do it well. They've never communicated outside of their little world. There's some little small specialty operating system, or they could be like the plant I walked into literally last week, and the computer was sitting there running the program in DOS. Okay, so here we've got OT out there running DOS, running Windows XP, all of these operating systems that are no longer supported from a security standpoint, and we're integrating those into the manufacturing facility, creating not, hundreds of points, but thousands of points that are weak and great attack points. So again, the bad news is 2 years ago, manufacturing was the second most affected by ransomware. Last year, it was the first most targeted industry. Why do we care? Why is it important that industry be protected? We talked about, well, one, because it is a critical infrastructure, but two, these two jets are very similar. And the bottom left one is the J-31. That's the Chinese fighter jet. And it looks very similar to our F-35 fighter jet. But I'd be willing to lay money on it that the United States did not get their plans for the F-35 from stealing it from the Chinese on their J-31, because it's not quite as sophisticated. It's not exactly, but it's extremely close to our F-35. So that means it's somewhere, rather than you designing it, going out, spending the money, trying to figure out how to design, implement, whatever. It's just cheaper to go out and steal it. And so we see things like this, particularly in the defense space. And so that's putting our defense and national security at risk. And so the DoD has recognized that. And so, when we look at other things, aerospace, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the guy I was sitting next to saw I was from Georgia Tech, and he says, "Oh, you're from Georgia Tech." And I thought we were going to have this conversation, and all of a sudden it was really about the fact that his son was at Georgia Tech. His son was an intern. He was doing this internship at an aerospace company. And he throws out this number that Georgia includes more than 800 companies in the aerospace industry. I'm like, no, that can't be right. 800 companies? And I went to the god of Google, Googled it right there, found out that, oh my gosh, there are 800 companies employing more than 100,000 people in the state of Georgia in the aerospace industry alone. So you can see that we've got again, this critical infrastructure, critical manufacturing. You see 65% of the industry in the aerospace is aircraft manufacturing in the state of Georgia. So take note of where those locations are on that map, because when we look at where manufacturers are located, or even any industry in the state of Georgia, remember we said they were small to medium, you can see that they're all over the state. So there's just a couple more maps. This one is, gun manufacturers in the state. And a lot of those gun manufacturers manufacture arms for the DoD. On the right, you've got, car plants, car manufacturers. And so what I've got on this particular slide is I'm talking about the IT resources. Where these plants are located, they rely heavily on local managed service providers, small, again, mom and pop IT companies to come in, set up, configure, and manage and administrate their IT structures. So when you start talking about cybersecurity, you are talking about companies that really are looking at you across the table going, we know how to get it up and running and keep it running, but we really have no clue about cybersecurity. And that's not unusual, because when we look at the demand for just cybersecurity professionals, we see that we've got 700, almost 750,000 just in the United States, job openings in cybersecurity. Around 4 million, depending on the statistics, 2 to 4 million worldwide need for cybersecurity professionals. So when I'm walking into these companies and talking to them today, 2022, what am I seeing? I'm seeing exactly the same scenario, the exact same IT setup, the exact same cybersecurity that I saw years ago. And so that's disconcerting when we're talking about manufacturing, and specifically when we're talking about DoD type information. So years ago, the DoD, after a number of breaches that were in the news, as well as breaches in the federal government space, the DoD said, we've got to crack down on third-party suppliers. And so they started putting what we call DFARS paragraphs in their contracts. Basically said, you need to meet these cybersecurity requirements. And these manufacturers and companies were coming back and signing those contracts and self-certifying and saying, we meet these cybersecurity requirements. And literally, I've sat across the table, and talked with companies over the last few months about this, and they've said, Yeah, we saw them in there. We kind of understood. We signed the paper because we wanted the contract. We wanted the money. And so what that's really saying is that they don't have a clue. They're not DFARS compliant. So basically the DOD said this whole self-certification thing is not working. We've got to tighten that. So over the last few years, they've come up with what they call the cybersecurity maturity model certification, and they have put new requirements for any company that wants to do work with the DoD. And those requirements are to be compliant with DFARS and NIST Special Publication 800-171. Out of the requirements, if you are basically a COTS, an over-the-counter supplier, you still have to self-certify that you are meeting 17 basic cybersecurity practices. But if you potentially have controlled unclassified information called CUI, then that's going to pop you up to a level 2 or a level 3 requirement for certification. And that's not just that you have to have those 17 basic cybersecurity practices. You have to align to 110 controls, and you will be assessed or audited by a third-party assessor who will come in. And that's where most companies are falling into if they do any sort of manufacturing for the DoD. They're falling into this level 2. Level 1 would be, you supply toilet paper, you cut the grass, you cook the food in the commissary or whatever. And so that's one thing. But if you are designing some little piece part that goes into a bigger piece part that goes into a bigger piece part, there's going to probably be a drawing that's going to have CUI stamped on it, or a mil spec, or a mil standard, something like that, that will require you to be certified to this level 2. So when we look at that, what does that really mean? Well, it means 3 things. You're going to have what's called a SPURS score, and the score can range from a negative 203 all the way up to 110. Remember, I said there were 110 controls. You have to have all 110 controls in place, working, and the auditor who comes in and looks at that has to say that you meet those 110 controls. You are in compliance. The good news is that today, well, I guess it could be the bad news depending on where you're at. The good or bad news is that today you have to have a SPURS score in the SPURS system in order to bid for or get a DoD contract. There is no longer just bidding for it. And so we're seeing that out of about 100,000 contractors who this might apply to, only about 20 to 30,000 of them so far have actually entered in a SPURS score. So I'm talking with companies that are saying, we can't do business. We have been told we can't do business either with the DoD directly, or we can't do business with the level 1 contractors, the primes that we've been doing work with, because we don't have a SPURS score. And then this is also trickle down. So this is not just third-party contractors to the DoD. These are third-party contractors to the third-party contractors, because if you have to take that CUI and break it out to your third-party contractors, they all have to be CMMC compliant as well. And they have to have a SPURS score entered into the database. And we're seeing that out in the field as well. You also have to have what's called a system security plan, which is how you are going to meet or how you're meeting those 110 controls. And then you have to have a plan of action items and milestones. And the goal there is that you have 6 months to go from whatever score you have currently to that 110 and be audited and be compliant with that 110. It's okay today if you have a negative score, as long as you have that score in the SPURS system. But it is coming very quickly that you will have to have not just a score, but you will have to have a plan of action items and milestones that within 6 months you will reach that 110 score in order to do business. And the DoD has already pulled about 300 people or companies who said they had 110 score and audited them and found that only about 25% of them are compliant. And starting this month, they have already stated that we have started with voluntary audits. So companies are already lining up and saying, we would like to be audited to see where we're at. So the audits have started. Again, right now it's just voluntary, but the rumor on the street is that probably by first quarter, middle of next year, all of these requirements are going to become mandatory. So people have been kind of waiting to see if this is going to come down, if it's going to be changed or whatever, but it's here. We are in this new world of CMMC compliance in order to work with the DoD. So let's talk about the new Cybersecurity 101. That's really kind of the meat of today. And it's based on what I call advanced control concepts. And I don't mean advanced as in, additional, or advanced as in additional or more complex, not as though they are new. We've had these controls for a number of years, but most of the companies out there don't have the time, the talent, the resource, the understanding, or whatever to really implement these control concepts. Remember that slide that I said, Cybersecurity 101 from 2015 and what I'm seeing here in 2022, that really hasn't changed as to what most companies have implemented. But now we've got all these new control concepts, and this is now just the new basics of what you've got to have specifically for CMMC. So secure network architecture, design it in, don't bolt it on. We'll talk a little bit about each of these. Zero trust, policies and procedures, control, managing risk, monitoring, logs and auditing, vulnerability intelligence, scans and patching, encryption, training, backup, and recovery. So let's talk about zero trust, for example. The old philosophy was trust but verify, right? These are small to medium-sized manufacturers. You started, as we said, as a family. You still trust everybody. And that was really about authorization, about granting you access to the network. It was, at that time and still today, using strong passwords and maybe even having a written password policy if you were that, quote, advanced. And maybe if you were even more advanced, you might use multi-factor authentication, something you are, something you have, something you do. You might have a key card, a fob, whatever. But most companies are still stuck at just having that, quote, strong password. That gets you onto the network. That's what's authorization. But authentication, zero trust, is about authentication. It's that you are having to prove you are who you say you are. And what that means is you may know everybody, you may love everybody in the company, but in zero trust, we suspect everyone. And we treat the network like it's already compromised. We assume the threats are always present, both internal and external. And we use control concepts called separation of duties and principle of least privilege. The president of the company, whether he likes it or not, does not necessarily need access to all the data. The executive VPs, the VPs, the whatever, the managers, department managers don't necessarily need access to all of the data, because if they get compromised, they can become a direct route into the rest of the network, into the rest of the data. Sadly, I don't have time today to tell you all the horror stories I've seen where in a number of cases, it is the owner, the CEO, the president of the company that pushes the button that brings the whole network down on ransomware because they feel like they have need of all access to all things, and they have network links that just basically allow the ransomware to reach everything. This is also talking about a concept of non-repudiation. That means that if something happens on the network, you can't deny it. We have proof that it was you who did the damage. And that also part of zero trust is that everything's monitored, there's logging going on, and there's the capability of auditing to be able to go back in and retrace what happened, when it started, and how it progressed, and what might actually have been breached or lost or exfiltrated, etc. So there needs to be an audit path, because that what I mentioned earlier about DFARS, one of the things about DFARS and those DFARS requirements is that if you have a breach, you have to report it. SP 800-171, the NIST document, does not require that, but your DFARS requirements in your contracts require that you have to report to the DoD any breaches, and they have to be able to come in and look at your system and do some sort of maybe a digital analysis, digital recovery of the information. And you might have to have logs for up to 6 months that they can go back and look, because some of these, they're called advanced persistent threats, could be sitting on your network for months at a time, just biding their time to slowly work around into your network, find where the critical information is, and then swoop in and steal it. So zero trust requires a lot of new controls that most companies do not have or do not practice. The old philosophy, the new philosophy, the way to think about it is that your employees have the keys to the kingdom, right? So think about it at your own home. If you heard a noise and you came out and all of a sudden there was somebody at the bottom of your steps, would you say, oh, you're in my house, welcome, right? Well, that's kind of the same thing, is it, right? If somebody gets access into your network, you wouldn't say, well, you have access to my network, welcome. But that's what's happening, right? Someone accesses your network and they have full access. And then what happens if you saw them in your refrigerator or saw them in, messing with your safe? Would you say, great, have at it, take whatever you need, welcome, I'm just glad to share it with you, right? So the old philosophy would be, once you had access, you could go raid the refrigerator or whatever. But the new philosophy is, what are you doing in my house? And part of that is also meaning you have to put something in place, as we said, to prove that that person is authorized to be and authenticated. So that could be, for example, Sam logs in every day in the morning, and we know from a pattern that Sam takes 5 or 6 times every Monday to remember his password, so he kind of mistypes it, whatever. So that might be a pattern for Sam. And that and the new controls would see Sam coming in, see him try 5 or 6 times to enter in his password, knows that that's Sam's pattern. But all of a sudden, Sam is trying to enter his password in 5 or 6 times, and it's 7 o'clock at night. That's not Sam's pattern. He logs in at 9 every morning. So now Sam is out of pattern. We also see that per the monitoring of the network, Sam is trying to log in from a country outside of the United States. Well, that's not Sam's pattern as well. So part of zero trust is also being able to look at the patterns of your users and say, this is out of character. So the next thing we want to talk about is secure network architecture. In the past, everything in security, sadly, was kind of an afterthought. Oh, I've got a network. Somebody comes in and they tell you about a new security product, or they try to sell you something and they want to bolt it on. They want to come in and add this one thing to your network. And then what we found is that, you try to bolt it on, and then you've got all these different options, and then you bolt something on this system, and you bolt something on this system, and then they don't play well with others. And then after the person who sold it to you and may have helped you install it leaves, you have no time, resources, talents to implement it or keep it running correctly. So now you're relying on contractors to come in and do this, and then you don't know whether it's installed correctly or incorrectly. So now you've wasted resources, and then you find out it never really worked as advertised when you get, attacked or hit or whatever. And then you find out, I've done all this, I've bolted all this stuff on, and I'm still not secure. Secure network architecture basically means you design it in. You start from scratch and you design everything that it works together in concert, such that it works, you can implement it correctly, you can install it correctly, install it, implement it, and manage it correctly, and know that you are secure. So that's kind of the concept of secure network architecture. Policies and procedures. We are family, right? This is all about, we started the company, we know everybody, we bowl with them, we eat on them and eat with them on Friday night. We have cookouts with the kids on the weekend. We trust everybody. And we just kind of, this family knowledge of how we operate, of how we know what to do, how visitors are treated and handled. As Tom said, we kind of know not to pick up the USB in the parking lot. We've kind of shared this knowledge, right? But, I'm walking into companies and saying, where's your policies and procedures? And what are they saying to me? We don't need no stinking rules. We kind of have, our whole thing down pat. We know what we need to do and how to do it. But the bottom line is, if an auditor walks in and it's not documented, then it doesn't exist, right? I don't care how well you think you know the policy and procedure and you think everybody in the family knows it. If it's not documented, it doesn't exist. And it also means there's not a consistent process, and there's then nothing you can use to hold people accountable. There's nothing to verify, nothing to audit. And sadly, there's nothing to present in court should it come to that. And when we look at specifically CMMC, the Department of Justice have come down and said, if you falsely say that you are compliant and you're not, and you have signed those contracts to get those contracts knowing that you're not compliant, then there could be potential penalties. And the DOJ has already assessed millions of dollars for companies that have said that very thing. So it needs to be written down. It needs to be proceduralized. And when it comes to CMMC, written policies document nearly 1/3. So when you're trying to get those 110 controls all to 100%, written policies and procedures get you a long way towards that objective. So these are some of the policies and procedures. If you were to just peruse through 800-171, these are different policies and procedures that are referenced. Now, do you need all these? Oh my gosh, look at this list. No, you don't. You would need the ones that would pertain to you, and you could then, create these, modify them, implement them according to how you operate your company. But it needs to be documented. Control everything and everyone. That means controlling access, physically, technically, administratively. If I walk through your plant and there's all your systems and you say, oh, we escort people up to the system and we stand there and watch what they do, and every door is open in your bays, and there's no fence around it, no gate, no guard, no cameras, no anything. Well, that's great that you've walked that person to that system and stand there and watch them. But then when your back is turned and nobody else is on the floor and all the doors are wide open, what does that mean from a control perspective? Tom mentioned, the USB, controlling the media. I was at a company just recently and doing a risk assessment, and there were two machines in the room. One was on the network, one was not. And saying, well, what does this machine do? He told me, he said, it creates this report. I said, well, how do you access that report? He said, well, we have to print it. And I said, do you put it on a USB and move it from that machine to the next machine? And he says, oh, no, our policy. And I said, is it written? No, it's not written. We don't have written policy procedures, but our policy, we all know that we don't use USBs. And so I said, okay, well, that's great. Okay, so you don't have a policy, but everybody knows you don't USBs. But I'm going to ask you again, how do you get the information from this computer to be printed and get it on the network and store it securely on your network in the file share, right? And he hangs his head and he says, I use a USB. And everybody in the room laughed. I laughed, right? Because we knew what the answer was. We knew he was going to say, I use a USB. So again, if it's not written down, does it exist? Control your employees. Control data in motion, in use, and at rest. Have some sort of data loss prevention. And when we say data in motion, we're not thinking about the fact that work from home laptops, bringing them from home to work to home, stopping by the grocery store, whatever in between, that's data also in motion, not just on the wire or across wireless. That means if you've got that USB in your pocket, that data is in motion. It's moving somewhere, and it needs to be protected. Controlling your assets, hardware, software, devices, passwords, controlling visitors. I showed up at one place. They made me log in. They announced me. They escorted me to the conference room. I said, is this your procedure? Yes. Was it written down? No. Is this your procedure? Yes. This is what you do with everybody? Yes. What about contractors coming to work? Oh, we escort them to the device. Do you stand there? Well, no, we escort them to the device and we walk away. So your contractor has full access to the machinery out on the floor. What happens when they're done? Well, they leave. Does anybody escort them? No. While I'm in the conference room, somebody shows up, says, hi, I'm here to say so-and-so. I know where his office is. He walks down the hall, past the server room. So everything they just told me went out the window, right? Again, not documented. In training, we'll talk about training in a few minutes. Control. Why do we really want to have control? Well, one, obviously it's required. But insider threats, most of the money we spend on protecting our network is from this perception of outsider threats. But really, when you look at the statistics, insiders pose a bigger risk than outsiders. And partly you could say that's because most outsiders get into your network because what happens, right? An insider who has the keys to the kingdom, who is already authenticated on your network, clicks a button, clicks a link, allows the outsider to come inside and then take over the insider's credentials and then move about the network like the insider. And there's other things as well as far as sabotage, etc., that insiders can do. Disgruntled employees. A lot of times it's malfeasance that's unintentional, right? There's 4 different types of insider attacks. I don't know how many times I've been called that somebody clicked on something and it disappeared or got deleted unintentionally, but it was critical data that got deleted, and it was just careless error. So insider threats. So that means that you need to have control in place of, when we talk about specifically employees, hiring them, doing background checks, doing integrity checks on them, giving those integrity tests, doing reference checks. How many times do we hire somebody and somebody else said, oh, here's so-and-so, is a good person, or he meets exactly what we need. You didn't do a reference check, and if you actually call the other company, you would find out that this is a bad employee, or that you do a credential check and they don't meet the industry certifications that they say they have, or the academic qualifications. And then once you've got them, training, and then terminating them appropriately. You need to have those policies and procedures and control in place for your employees of how to fire them. When is the best time to terminate an employee? The best time is on a Friday afternoon at quitting time, not on a Wednesday, because you're going to tick them off, right? You're going to send them home. They're going to sit there and stew about how unjust their life is and how you're to blame for it. And that's where then problems happen, right? Those employees return and bad things can happen at the company. fire them on a late on a Friday afternoon. They got the weekend to cool off. They got the weekend for people to tell them, talk to them and talk them down from whatever things or thoughts they might have. When do you lock them out? I don't know how many times I've walked in and said, where's Sue? Where's Joe? Oh, Scott let him go 2 weeks ago. How come I wasn't notified? And then recovering their assigned devices, I'm like, well, where are their devices? Oh, Scott said they needed to look for another job. So, he told them they could keep their phone and their laptop and their MiFi and all that until they found another job. And I said, and they've still got access to our network, right? So when you terminate them, secure the data, secure potentially evidence. If it's a bad employee that has done something that could come back to bite you later, say an EEOC suit or something like that, how do you secure that evidence? We don't think about it. So many companies, when an employee leaves, might wipe the hard drive and get it ready for somebody else. And then all of that evidence that you might need later to defend yourself is gone. So let's talk about managing risk real quickly. Everything in a company is about profitability versus sustainability. So every decision you make has to be documented moving forward. And there's 4 ways of managing risk, basically. You can avoid it, you can transfer it, you can migrate it, or mitigate it, and you can accept it. A lot of people, when we talk about transference, that's meaning you're getting cybersecurity insurance. If you start researching cyber insurance now, it's not covering as much, and the rates are going through the roof because cyber insurers are understanding that companies companies are being attacked, and they're calling their insurers and saying, we need this money. And so there's a lot of, losses going on. So cybersecurity insurance is not necessarily the answer. And we already talked about the Department of Justice is coming after companies who actually falsify, whether they realize it or not, that they're signing these contracts. Other items, quickly, we talked about monitoring logs and auditing, vulnerability intelligence scans and patching, use of encryption. Almost 100%. When I say the word encryption, the answer is no, we don't encrypt anything. And then we've already mentioned training. And did we mention training? Everything we've talked about needs to be trained frequently, right? And then backup and recovery, which is a whole nother issue that we can cover in another time, but that's basically giving you resiliency. It means if tomorrow the world explodes, how do you get up and running? And so do you have some sort of cyber emergency plan? And there's all kinds of great acronyms, BIA and DRB and continuity plans, etc. But basically, what I like to tell companies is, do you have documents for the important stuff on paper, right? If ransomware, or you had the bottom one, a tornado come in and take critical systems out of play, right? How would you operate tomorrow? And it's just fascinating to me that, I walk into a company that is down, and everybody's sitting there, and I go, what's going on? Well, we can't work. Why can't we work? Well, the network's down. And I go, in the old days, we had paper and pencils and pens, and we need to teach a new generation how to take orders, how to write things down, how to record things, so that when you can keep running, and then when the network goes back up, you can enter that into the database, because you're losing business while you're down. Print out list of suppliers, ARAP, current orders, contracts. I've had clients that when the network went down, when the server went kaput, they didn't know who they owed, who owed them, what they ordered, when it was going to be delivered, what contracts they had. They were at a total loss. Print out a list of critical support contact information, your network equipment username and passwords. I don't know how many times I walk in and I look at the employees of the company and say, do you have a list of usernames and passwords of your network equipment? And they go, no. Our managed service provider has all of that. And I go, okay, tomorrow we're firing your managed service provider. Now, how do you access the network? Do you think they're going to be friendly and hand you back that spreadsheet that they've got somewhere on their drive, which you have no idea where it's secured, they're going to hand that back to you, right? Network topology. How does it all connect? It's been bolted on, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Do you understand how your network is laid out if tomorrow you had to rebuild it? And then assets, having a list of your hardware, software assets, keeping it up to date. How do you know how much insurance to buy? Not cyber insurance, but just general liability or whatever insurance. If the plant is destroyed tomorrow, all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, we had X number of these things, and it's going to cost this and this to get it not only purchased, but installed and then back up and running. Any intellectual property, any proprietary databases. And another one that people don't think about is a list of key websites. I remember one time auditing and doing an analysis and found out that one person in the company had the key websites, so like 100 different websites and usernames and passwords, that if that person left, people would have no clue how to get licenses in other states for the contracts that they work, to log in and do all this stuff, because this one person had it on her system and she was the keeper of it. And so, that was a single point of failure for that company. Make sure the right people have access to it, lock it up, put it in a vault, have a communication plan if tomorrow everything goes to heck in a handbasket, and know who your critical key staffing people are. There are tools out there. CSET, the CISA has this thing called CSET, and it's one of the things that you can use to walk through and do a security evaluation of your own system. It has all kinds of maturity models and different types of platforms that you can use, including a CMMC2, and you can get a SPURS scorecard on your own. However, I find that most people obviously answer them much more generously than when you really look at the meaning of the question. So people really grade themselves higher, but at least it is a platform you can use. They have a cyber resiliency review part of the CSET, and some other things, a ransomware readiness assessment that you can run for your own self. CSET is free. You can download it, install it, and walk through the process on your own. It has all kinds of cybersecurity standards. The one that's right down here in the bottom center is the NIST critical cybersecurity framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which about 80% of large companies comply with. So that's a very good standard. If you don't have to have CMMC requirements, then NIST cybersecurity framework should be a baseline for you to walk through that. And there it is as well. You can click it and go right on through answering the questions. You can see there's 347 questions, etc., 108 requirements, and it will walk you through and give you a score, just like the SPURS score. Then there are platforms, CMMC platforms, that will help you track your 110 controls, give you an initial SPURS score, and then as you implement the controls, we'll ratchet up and improve your SPURS score. It'll also provide you with the SSP and the POEM, and you can print those out at any time. So when the auditor shows up, you can push a button. We at Georgia MEP actually have grant funding for the first year for 2 of those platforms, FutureFeed and IntelliGRC. So if you work with us, we would give you those platforms for the first year free of charge as part of our fee. But then, then you could continue to use them and pay for them after that. So the other thing you have to be careful of is if you use some of these platforms, because there are others out there, you've got to make sure that you know where they're storing your data, because those are listing of your vulnerabilities, the kind of CUI that you might have, etc. And you want to make sure that they also comply with what's called Fedramp. And Fedramp is just where the federal government has certified certain cloud vendors to say that you can put the information in those vendors' cloud and it meets these security requirements. Remember that CMMC compliance is not necessarily DFARS compliance. There is a difference between 800-171 compliant, which is CMMC, and those DFAR clauses that'll still be in your contracts. Because DFARS is still going to say, if you have a breach, you got to report, and we have to have the ability to come in and audit and do digital forensics, which is not part of 800-171 compliance. But you've got to be compliant with both of those, depending on what's in your contracts. There are other templates out there. If you want to do work on your own security plan or POEM, there are templates that you can download. There are policy templates to help you get started. If you want to purchase, for example, compliance boards, you can just go ahead and click the button. And again, these are not cookie cutter. I mean, they are templates, but you have to then sit down and put your own personal company information in there, etc., to make them your own. There's also, compliance boards also has a spreadsheet. And what this is if the controls, 110 controls are on the left, and then for micro, small businesses, medium-sized business, and it goes all the way up to the right to the, enterprise, large enterprises, it will tell you different kinds of softwares and vendors that have products that then help you meet those controls. A little bit about us, Georgia MEP. We are here to help. You hear that, but we truly are here to help. We're state and federally funded. We can, come in with that state and federal funding and therefore discount the services that we do. Should you need a risk assessment, a CMMC gap analysis, or you want to comply to, let's say, ISO 27001 or some other, the NIST cybersecurity framework. So that's who we are. We have 10 regional managers across the state. We can put you in contact with one of them. And we do not just cybersecurity. We do all kinds of work with companies to help them with strategy, leadership development, etc. I'm working with, so last year we worked with over 500 manufacturers to, help them create 1,600 jobs, etc. So we're part of the National MEP Network, and I'm actually on the Georgia Defense Industrial Base Task Force. We've been working for the last few years to try to help create regulations, legislation, get the word out, training, etc. So you can actually go online and see some of the other resources that are out there, videos, training videos, etc. And then if you want to connect with us, this is our information. And that's my business card on the right if there's anything I can do to ever help you out in any of this.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. That was great stuff. And really, I encourage people and just let's leave this up here, the QR code up just a little bit. I really encourage people, if you have questions and so forth, to reach out to Michael. I have to say, if you're going to be engaging, and particularly with the federal government, it really is important that you understand a lot of this, because they're going to make these requirements and you're going to be signing off on them in terms of working with them. We even see that as well, in terms of over at Georgia Tech, grades. So grades are all protected information. So we can't just store things on Dropbox or Google Drive and so forth. There's a very long negotiation to make sure that all the right protocols are followed and so forth. So this is coming through, not just on the business side, but across all of society. So I strongly encourage people to really make sure they understand what Michael was talking about. It was awesome.
As Tom said, there's my business card on there. That feel free to email me, email Megan or Tom or Kyle. One of us should be able to help you or direct you. I'm sorry there was a little bit rushed today. I know there was a lot of information. There's some other techniques out there I wish I could have talked about, like Microsoft, GCC, and GCC High, how they're helping a lot of small companies be compliant. But maybe that's something, Tom, in a future presentation we can address some of these other
questions. One question that I have for you, Michael, is can you speak to, this is great in terms of business and so forth, et cetera, but even for just personal life at home and so forth, how do these things fit into your everyday life, right? We're logging into the bank and we're hearing from credit card companies saying, oh, hey, then, you got an issue or a security breach. I just heard from one, they said, oh, we had a breach and so forth. And so how does what you're talking about here fit into just even everyday life?
It's an excellent question because, over the last couple of years, everybody was at a company that hopefully had somebody looking out and protecting the information, protecting the network, and training the employees. And we sent them all home. And I know I heard the state attorney general for Georgia speak. This was probably 6 months into COVID. And he said that there had been a 700% increase in fake websites out there, cure for COVID, personal protection, order it here, we've got it, even order your toilet paper that you can't find, order it here. And then, of course, you're just clicking through, putting your information, and they're just stealing it. They're fake websites. So, that's an excellent question. And it goes back to kind of what I talked about in that first slide. Sadly, the 2015 standard really still applies, right? Don't click on links from email, have a strong password, change your password. One of the things that I encourage people to do as an exercise to just, if you don't believe cybersecurity is important, sit down with a legal pad and write down every website that you access. And that includes credit cards, if you have, some sort of state licenses or anything that you have to access that you have a username and a password, and you'll be shocked at how many of those you have. And so, how frequently have you changed that username and password? When I first moved into academia, I was doing some talks, and I would think people would ask me these great questions, cybersecurity questions, and people, they basically had three questions. One was, can you recommend a good malware? And one of the things that I always told them was anti-malware. And I'd said, well, one is you get what you pay for, right? So if it's if you're using a vast free version, then that's what you're getting. Pay for it, make sure it's good. I can't really say, yay or nay here about certain companies, but I will tell you that the stuff that basically comes with the computers that you would buy already installed is bloatware. Go, strip that off and go buy some, and contact me directly, and I can make you some recommendations of better malware. The other is, should I be monitoring my credit score? Well, yes, you should be monitoring your credit score. And the other is, should I be paying to monitor my credit score? Yeah. Should I be paying to find out if I've been hacked? For X amount, they'll tell me if I'm on the dark web. And I always say, here's how many billions of pieces of information that are already out on the dark web. Divide that by 300 million Americans. Say 150 million of us are adults. And you can see how many times your personal information is already out on the dark web and is already being sold. Yeah. So you don't have to pay a company to find out if your information on the dark web. Just go ahead and assume, as we said before, everybody's been hacked now. Your information's out there. So change your passwords. Go through that frequently.
Yeah. Yeah, I just can't, sort of stress, right? You get your notes from your banks and so forth that say, hey, we will never ask you to click on a link. And I've gotten some great phishing emails where it really, boy, it looks like the bank sent it. But, if there's something that the bank says, hey, go to the bank website, log in, and then work on it from there, right? I mean, it's just amazing how sophisticated some of these are, and you could sort of get into it. I'm sure, and as we go to 101 and 102 and 103 in terms of our classes, you're going to see some pretty cool examples out there where they really get you. And I got to tell you, over here at Georgia Tech, we got an email here basically saying, oh, yep, you're up for your cybersecurity training. It was actually, click on this link for your cybersecurity training. Well, I called up the cyber office and I said, is this real? And they're like, yeah. And I said, you tell us not to do that. So even your cyber experts are saying, well, we got to get some training and so forth. And so you've got to really make sure we ingrain that. But they said, well, we're glad you pointed it out. We've ingrained it in the culture. It's really a cultural thing. Anyway, yeah. Good.
Yeah. And not just, clicking on that. It's also now cyber from a standpoint of getting the phone call, right? This is the IRS, or this is your bank. And, we need you to verify your credentials because we've got your credit card or your bank shut down. Please, give us to validate that it's you. And, that's just another phishing scam or
Right.
phishing, voice phishing.
Good. Well, I think it's pretty good. I think we want to be mindful of people's time. We're a little bit over, but this has been great. And so number one, I want to thank Michael for engaging here. Kyle, I know Kyle is going to be engaging in our next round. Megan, thank you so much for organizing this and really putting this together. And as Michael said, feel free to reach out to us and so forth for any questions or whatever. And look, if we don't have an answer, we'll certainly send you in the right direction. But you are, in particular with Michael and with Kyle, you're talking to two people who really know what they're talking about. I mean, I'm just smart enough not to plug that USB drive in there and so forth. And so far, so good.